Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be discussing the impact of the pandemic of COVID-19 on archaeology, specifically in the UK. Like everything else in our world, archaeology has not escaped unscathed or unaffected by the pandemic at all, although I would argue in some ways that archaeologists do tend to have a unique perspective when it comes to the pandemic. We study the past, things like the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. I know that for me, someone who knows a little bit about the history of pandemics, I am definitely not surprised that things have gone the way that they've gone. But also it makes me very aware of how lucky we are as a modern society to not only have modern medicine that is able to develop a vaccine for us so quickly. I know people probably think that it's not very quick, but in this scale of things it is. We're not having to sacrifice people and wait for herd immunity to take over. We're able to do that through science. It also really made me greatly appreciate the internet. Like, I can't really imagine how much worse things would have been if I didn't have access to the internet while I was stuck at home during the initial lockdown period, and I was furloughed as well. Having the internet allows me to talk to my family and to reassure myself that they are safe away in Canada, allows me to still socialize with my friends. Even if I can't see them in person, I can play video games, I can watch videos. There's all these things through the internet that are available to keep you entertained that I'm extremely grateful for, especially when I think about people who were experiencing the Spanish flu, bubonic plague, the Black Death. All you could really do was sit at home, pray, do embroidery if you were a woman. Like, most people couldn't read, so you can't even distract yourself that way. So it definitely gave me a perspective that we're very, very lucky, even if some people don't think that we are, that we live in this modern day. Even though it's hard for people, and I'm not saying it's not been hard, it's certainly probably the easiest pandemic that we've ever lived through collectively. Archaeology as a sector in the UK obviously has not escaped unscathed, unlike any other aspect of society. Some of these effects might be surprising for you to learn, and also I just thought that they might be helpful, especially for any students or anyone who is looking to enter the world of archaeology right now, because I'm very aware that as a graduate it must be very intimidating to think of trying to join the job market in these circumstances. All of the opinions that I'm talking about here today are my own, gathered from the fact that I work for a commercial archaeology company. Also, I have a lot of friends that work in commercial archaeology, but I also have friends who work in academia at universities. I know some people who work at larger heritage organizations like Historic Environment Scotland or the National Trust. I'm gonna try and talk about all of these sectors in general. The first thing we're gonna talk about today is field schools. So in case you didn't know, field schools are something that are generally run by university programs for archaeology degrees to help you gain some practical skills in the field. And while there are certainly field schools that are run locally by some schools, I know my school did a dig that was set in Ontario. You didn't have to travel internationally for it, especially for people studying ancient civilizations that are not based in the place that they're studying from. Field schools are not essential, and so the travel ban affected them in that pretty much all international field schools this year/summer were canceled. I don't know of any that went ahead. I know quite a few people who were planning on going abroad to dig have had those plans canceled. However, this is not going to hopefully have a huge impact in the long term on a lot of those actual projects, because they are long-running research digs. They have funding behind them already, and so having 1 year off for what will probably for many digs turn out to be a study season is not going to badly affect them, and hopefully most of the students who are set to go onto those digs will be able to go next year or the year after when vaccinations are available and we can freely travel again. Very much related to this is the world of academia and universities, so people based at universities that do teaching and students who are taking courses. In my personal opinion of what I have seen across the sector, I would say that the universities are probably the hardest hit by this pandemic in a couple different ways. Not only have lecturers and professors had their summer research digs canceled, which perhaps they were depending upon that for writing a paper or maybe making like a research application or something, but beyond that, they've also had to make this gigantic switch from in-person to virtual teaching, which puts a lot of extra pressure on what I think many people would call an already quite strained workforce. From what I hear, and I'm not saying that this is 100% true, but the general impression I get is that universities are trying to do more with less. They are downsizing departments but increasing class sizes. They are expecting professors to still put out the same quality of work and give out the same quality of education. And now the pandemic adds to that by either expecting you to do virtual teaching, which is a whole nother thing that you have to learn how to do, also in terms of getting like the resources to be able to do it. But if you're actually able to do any in-person teaching, you then have to divide your classes up into much smaller sizes, which means that it's like triple the workload for a teacher who has to go from giving one class to, let's say, 30 students, to now having to give 3 separate classes to 10 students each, all for the same duration that they would have done for one big class. I'm also not sure, but I would doubt that many of these teachers are getting a lot of extra pay for all this extra work. And I'm sure the universities are also struggling financially like everybody else, so they're not going to be exactly eager to pay teachers a lot more for all of this extra work. I would assume that most professors and lecturers in the UK are not paid by the hour. They are salaried like myself. So that might be a bit different for maybe TAs, teaching assistants for courses. Archaeology occupies this kind of weird space in universities where a lot of people think that the subject's very interesting, and you might get a lot of people taking archaeology courses as electives. But in general, I would not say that archaeology alumni are donating a lot of money back into the university. It's not a department like business, economics, or STEM that is going to be attracting a lot of like science funding. In terms of the commercial development-led private sector, whatever you want to call it, I would say that while we obviously have not escaped unscathed, we have probably charted the steadiest course throughout this after an initial like blip. That's not representative of the entire sector, but in general, I would say we're doing okay. This will depend company to company on what kind of projects and what kind of clients that they take on for their projects. Smaller companies or freelancers, I would expect, are struggling quite a lot more than the bigger companies because they don't tend to work on big infrastructure projects. They tend to work more with private clients who are perhaps doing like an addition to their house, or they're a small-time house builder or something like that. So those revenue sources have dried up a lot more than the infrastructure projects. Companies that work on the big infrastructure projects like HS2, the A14, or the newly announced tunnel through Stonehenge are probably going to come out the other side of the pandemic okay, probably not as good as they were going in, but I would doubt that many of them are going to be at a high risk for bankruptcy because all their work has gone away. There was obviously an initial downturn of work when everything went ballistic in March. After a first hiccup of a couple months, I would say that in my experience, things are now pretty much back to what they were before, if not ramping up a bit, because all of that stuff that was like delayed or put on hold is now like piling up, so to speak. It helps that these big infrastructure projects were classed as essential work. So that meant that there was quite an incentive to get us back on site. Like many others, a lot of people were initially furloughed at the beginning of lockdown in the UK, but probably by the beginning of summer, a lot of people were coming back to work and have been trickling back in since then. The benefit to archaeology and being able to still continuously work during the pandemic is that when you're working in the field, especially in the UK, it can be quite a solo job. You can put your site team on site working on features that are definitely 2 meters apart on most sites. You can make it so that they're not having to share tools, but the big issues for us aren't necessarily in the actual work that we're doing, it's the stuff that's around it. So travel, accommodation, and breaks. Those are all activities that we tend to do together. You travel to work in a work van, you all sit in the site hut for a break, and you stay together in an accommodation when you're away from home from Monday to Friday. And these are obviously not things that are easy to do during a pandemic when all the hotels are closed, etc. So the initial struggle, I think, was really to pivot projects and to put all of these measures in place. And once they kind of had that little infrastructure built, everything has started to go back more or less to normal. The ways that we've been solving these issues are by having people either take staggered breaks, having people take breaks in their cars, having people stay in their own accommodation by themselves. So we rent out apartments or a single hotel room. People aren't having to share a house together. In regards to travel, they are limiting the amount of people that are traveling in a car, whereas before you might put 4 people into a car to get onto site. Now you would put a driver and a passenger in the back if they're not within a social bubble together. This has the knock-on effect, meaning that there is actually like way more demand for drivers and people with driving licenses. If you are familiar with my channel, you will have heard me say to you before that if you want a leg up, get your flippin' driver's license. It is invaluable, especially right now. That will definitely give you an advantage over anybody who does not have a license. Interestingly, this is also a time where the fact that archaeologists tend to be quite inbred, in that we like to date a lot of other archaeologists, is definitely like a thing. It is something that's actually become an advantage. If you are a couple who are both working as archaeologists for the same company, that benefits you because that means that you are 2 people that the company doesn't have to worry about isolating from each other. You are already within a bubble. You can get sent to sites together. In general, there haven't been large-scale redundancies at most of the major companies working in the UK. And when I say major, I mean like 50+ people. However, it's not all roses. There have been widespread mental health issues springing up as a result of the pandemic across everybody, not just archaeologists. But I know that it's going to be something that is especially hard for quite a lot of people who are maybe perhaps quite social and who really enjoyed the social aspect of the archaeology away work. When you're away with your colleagues who are also your friends, you work together all day and then you go to the pub at night, or you are socializing back at your accommodation, you're making dinner together, and now you can't do that anymore. You can't get that same kind of face-to-face interaction. I know for me personally, it's been quite weird to be working entirely from home and only seeing my partner every day. The social isolation of COVID has definitely had an impact into our sector. There's also obviously a lot of people having anxiety about, am I still going to have a job, or am I going to get laid off because of this, even if I have a permanent contract? Graduates must be worrying right now, can I even get a job if I graduate? I would generally say yes. You don't need to worry about that as much. There are going to be people that are afraid to come into work because they don't want to get COVID, or they're shielding at home. As a sector, I think we've been dealing with it. There's a lot of surveys that have been going out about it and reports being made, and people are trying to make an effort to still encourage social interaction, even if it's through a video or a mobile medium rather than in person. But it remains to be seen how it's all going to play out. One of the other things a lot of the commercial sector has had to adjust to, and in general everyone has had to adjust to, is this big move to working from home. This is a work strategy that I think archaeology in general has been quite behind on for some time and has now been forced to adapt and adopt. I think that initially that was quite an issue for a lot of people, to try and get your office-based workforce to be working from home. You know, we had the similar issues to a lot of other people with making sure that everyone has a laptop, making sure that they can all get access to servers, etc. And there's always been this mindset in archaeology that, you know, you travel to the archaeology, it doesn't come to you at your home, and that has really been reflected into our office space. Working from home just hasn't been something that a lot of us do. It might be something that you would be able to argue for, but in general, a lot of the companies I worked for like to have you in the office working for them, especially if you were working on finds or environmental processing, stuff to do with the lab. For example, my office that I work in, all of us are working at home. Before, you'd have anywhere from like 15 to 20 people in the office every day. At least there was an option for there to be more in there, but we are all working from home. I've only been to the office twice since March. I know that there are a lot of companies and sectors out there right now who are, as a result of the pandemic and then realizing how feasible home working is, are considering downsizing or completely getting rid of their office space. I don't think that's something that's going to happen in archaeology, because we have our labs that we need to have for washing finds and environmental samples, and our storerooms for all of our archived material. And those things aren't going anywhere, so we will always need office space, especially when it comes to like a warehouse space. So I don't think that you're going to see a lot of archaeology offices disappearing as a result of the pandemic. I think that instead, perhaps maybe they'll downsize a little bit. In general, I just think you'll see a lot more people doing like flexi working from home and working from the office, which is something that I was already doing pre-pandemic and is something that I definitely want to continue post-pandemic. I enjoy working from home and not having to commute every single day into work, even though by commuting standards I don't have a big one. But I also find myself missing the camaraderie of seeing my colleagues and coworkers, hearing what's going on in the company, chatting with people besides my partner, getting out of my house. Last little section of the archaeology sector that we're going to talk about is probably the one that I have the least knowledge of, which is, so I'm going to lump them all together. It's things like museums, heritage bodies, and government organizations. In comparison to academia, who moved much of their workforce into teaching virtually, and commercial archaeology, which after a blip is kind of proceeding as normal, but with a lot more people working from home. The above are the ones that have probably had to furlough like the biggest amount of people for the longest amount of time. Museums are kind of an interesting one because obviously a lot of museums in the UK are free, so they do not rely on people to visit the museum and pay to go into it as a revenue stream. Nonetheless, they are still struggling, and they will have had similar issues to the commercial sector in terms of like getting people to work from home when the thing that they need to work on, they can't take it home with them. Like, you're not going to bring a giant like basalt quern into your house with you, much less if you can even fit it in there. Organizations like Historic Environment Scotland, Historic England, the National Trust for Scotland, the National Trust, Heritage England, etc. These places that rely on admissions to their properties for a revenue streams or for memberships as revenue streams are probably the ones that have struggled financially the most. So this is really sad, and I'm hoping that maybe in the bounce back from the pandemic, but I think that they're probably going to have the longest term struggle in terms of finance in comparison to either academia or commercial archaeology. So if you have the time to support them, they are important organizations for preserving heritage, and a little goes a long way. All right, so that's all I really have to say on the subject so far. Obviously, this is an ongoing situation. COVID is not by any means over. It's still going to be around for probably a while, even after we get a vaccine, because as my partner keeps reminding me, they actually have to distribute the vaccine to everybody, which is a huge distribution logistics project. It's not just developing the vaccine and saying it's okay, you actually have to like give it to people. Perhaps in a year, I'll do another video and we'll see how things are looking a year on and how things have changed in the sector. I don't think that the pandemic has completely sounded the death knell for archaeology as a sector. I think that we will keep on limping on. If you are an archaeologist or someone working in the heritage sector and you have a perspective you'd like to add to this video, please put it in the comments down below. If I've gotten anything wrong, please let me know. Like I said, this is something that is entirely based upon my own opinions and conversations that I've had with people. So it's not by any means representative of the entire sector, and there's always room for me to be wrong about stuff. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you would like to see more from me and help to support my channel, please subscribe and hit the bell notifications so that you get notified every time I put out new videos. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please put them in the comment section down below. I do make an effort to try and to respond to everybody on my channel, and I really love interacting and engaging with you guys. In case you didn't see the post on my community channel page, I am moving my schedule. I went from really struggling to put a video out like once a month to being furloughed and suddenly having all this free time, and from about April I was starting to do like a video every week, which I've maintained for the first little bit that I've been able to go back to work. But now that I'm back full-time, it's been a bit more of a struggle for me to try and make sure that I not only have time for work, but time for planning my wedding, and also time for filming videos, and then time to just like chill. This is basically to say that instead of trying to keep up my weekly schedule, I'm now moving to doing 2 videos a month every other week. So keep your eye out for the next one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!